Al Jazeera's investigative unit, in a recent documentary titled Gold Mafia, exposed how criminal gangs are smuggling billions of dollars worth of gold from Zimbabwe to Dubai, aiding in money laundering and helping governments circumvent international sanctions. The investigation revealed the involvement of Zimbabwean government officials and business people, including one of the country's most influential diplomats, with the help of undercover reporters posing as Chinese criminals looking to launder money. The investigation uncovered a web of shell companies, fake invoices, and paid-off officials. Let's have a quick chat about this. Joining us now is Tawanda Raymond Mutungama. He's a political analyst. He's based in Tajikistan. Thank you so much for your company here, Raymond.
Thank you, Cami. Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, let me pick your initial thoughts on the documentary. How have you seen it and what you think about it?
So I've watched the documentary, and yes, my first comment is the title of the documentary, Mafia. It's a big word to address government officials and different people that are addressed in this video.
Very well, we'll get into the nitty-gritties in a bit, but let me also introduce Nozipo to our conversation. Nozipo Zipo Moyo is Executive Director for Africa Kiburi. She's based in Washington, D.C. Nozipo, it's good to see you again. And I'd like to find out from you too, what do you think about this expose?
Thank you for having me. For me, we always knew that minerals are being looted. There have always been allegations. For me, the expose is just putting the names to the suspensions, what everyone was thinking, yeah.
I see. What would you say stood out for you, Nozipo?
I always knew looting is there, but I was not aware to such levels. It's one thing when we're talking about the government and its party as a system. It's another when you're noticing how the web is so concrete, so solid, and it's global. So for me, that was a wake-up call to say we're not fighting a government, we're not fighting a political party, we're fighting a global system. For me, that was the highlight, that this is bigger than Zimbabwe.
Very well, and I move on to Tawanda now. Tawanda, you said you've seen the documentary. You feel free to share with us what what stood out for you. But what I want to find out from you really is, how do you think this could impact gold trading in the Southern African region?
So for the gold trading in the Southern African region, I think it starts time immemorial. If you come to our museum in Harare, you will see nails that are made of gold. So we used to trade with different parties, especially the Asians have always had interest in our gold, considering they put a lot of emphasis and value to gold. So gold trading has always been common in our civilization as Great Zimbabwe. And so it's not something new, and it's not something that will stop, considering gold is the real money in the world. And actually, I've always asked myself, how can our country with so much gold have problems in currency? So eventually, if we are able to harness the resources that we have, like what other countries like Qatar have done, Dubai has done, we'll develop our country to the highest level. And what will this take? This takes us to be more accountable in this trade and us being involved in the international community. We need to make the political environment, the economic environment connected to the international community. So whatever it takes to have things like sanctions that make our gold have to go through illegal channels come off, we need to do those steps. We need to talk to the world and be involved with what the world has to offer and the normal trading channels. I'll give you an example of Australia. When the Aborigines were in Australia, they did not know that they owned all the iron ore because they were not connected to the world. But once other people from other nations who were more connected started to come, they benefited, or the country became wealthy from the iron ore. They were using stones when they had iron ore. So this is our situation.
Indeed. And you know, Tawanda, just hold on for me 1 second. Perhaps, I mean, at the risk of sounding like I'm speaking for the government that has failed to comment on this matter, the reason could be that it needed to find a way around the sanctions to make sure that it could get some direct gold sales into its coffers. Would that be enough reason to use the channels that they chose to use?
It's always a complicated thing, because if we look at supply and demand, if you have a good which has value, like monetary value, the highest form of money ever in the world, it will have some demand. And with this demand, channels will start to be created. So to eventually benefit the majority of Zimbabweans, we need to formalize whatever is happening, and we need to negotiate with the rest of the world to be back on the normal trading channels, so that we do not, the demand for our gold does not need to go through illicit ways. So that is the crux of the matter, because there is demand for our gold.
I want to move on to Nazipo now. Nazipo, what do you think? Would that be enough excuse for this level of illicit trade that has, well, would it be excuse for the channel created, which has now been taken advantage of, and it has, you know, prompted this level of illicit trade of gold and money laundering?
Which has been an issue of sanctions, which we get the degree of sanctions and how everything through the global markets can be affected. So for me, it's one thing when we're, as a country, we're fighting foreign sanctions. It's another when we use foreign sanctions as an excuse to steal from each other. So that has happened. You have found alternative ways to still get the national resources out. But you have people who are coming in, mortgaging the country's business people. So for me, as a Zimbabwean, it's one thing how we have sanctions from the West. I believe it's unwanted. But if people are using that as an excuse to siphon the resources meant for the nation, that's where the issue is. And these are the people who have stylish lifestyles, who are pompous, who even brag on online to say, what are you going to do about it? I'm putting on a belt with 5,000. For me, that is where my issue is. And you know, it's one thing when a father does haste to steal and still safeguard and protect his family. It's another when that father is stealing to safeguard God knows what is happening.
Very well. So I want us to pick on something that you know, I saw in the documentary. Prophet Angel, who is an ambassador at large for Zimbabwe, charged $200,000 to have those posing as investors see the president. Now, how complicit do you think that makes the president? Is it even enough to consider that?
Yes, for me, the government has not responded for obvious reasons, because we're still waiting for other parts, and they need to make sure what has been exposed yet to see how they defend themselves. But that says a lot about our own head of state. And for the record, Zimport 3 days ago had to win a court order where it is now asking the Parliament of Zimbabwe to continue with its role to safeguard issues of public debt. That shows how the president has given executive powers to individuals who have not safeguarded we have not safeguarded the livelihoods of all Zimbabweans. So for me, this expose, the biggest name, which is not being said, but who has to account, is the president himself.
I see. Tawanda, let's talk about Brother Paul. Brother Paul has a history of a similar practice in Kenya, where, you know, he managed to go to court, but 13 years later, he was acquitted of all the charges against him, and he moves on to Uganda. To Zimbabwe, I beg your pardon. Shouldn't some kind of due process, shouldn't some kind of background check have gone on to know who this Brother Paul is?
Well, like it depends. Like my comment would be, if they, like, as Africa, it's up to us to set like rules. Like, if we control a parliament, it's up to us to set the laws that govern who comes and who leaves. And also, it's up to us to set rules on how our resources are traded, not based on who's governing, not based on which individual comes, but we need to have a system that works, and not to have it as an abstract idea on how investment happens. Like, I'll give you an example. For all our resources, I think we are probably one of the few countries where an investor can come through and own 100% of a mine when the resources are ours. And we can also give an exemption of taxation. So it is not something that is so easy. Like, as it is labeled in courts, mafia. It's complicated. There is no country which can say they don't have organized business or organized crime. And also, I think it's also a big disrespect because in my culture, being Zimbabwe, where we come from, we have respect of our diplomats and would not call them diplomatic mafias. No, we have respect for our leaders. And I think it is utter disrespect from other nations or other media companies to call our diplomats mafia. I think we could not do that for diplomats coming from elsewhere. I think as Africa, we need to demand respect, to say there's a way that we call our leaders.
Oh, well, I'm struggling to understand you, Tawanda. Are you saying that? Are you saying that you know, the scripture used for those who are engaged in the smuggling is wrong? What should we call them if we don't call them a mafia?
Well, like it's like if a diplomat is still sitting in office, they've got immunity and they don't represent themselves. They represent a country, they represent a government, and they are immune.
I understand, but wouldn't you be more interested in what that person is using?
To the nation.
Yes, indeed. Wouldn't you be more interested in what that person is using that office for than what title, you know, an international organization gives them for their wrongdoing? I would think that would be the core of the conversation, Tawanda.
Well, but just to start with, like there's a picture that you shared of one of our diplomats branded as mafia. So what are you saying about Zimbabwe? Are you saying our government is mafia? It's disrespect to a whole nation.
I see.
If our diplomats who represent the country are named in this way.
I see. I just move on quickly to Nozipo. Nozipo, and again, feel free to react to what you heard from Tawanda. But here's my actual question to you. I also see, and at the risk of sounding racist, I see that the people at the helm of affairs when it comes to the gold trade don't look like people like you and me, or all four of us, all three of us, I beg your pardon, speaking right now. What does it say about, you know, those who have power to the resources of Zimbabwe?
Okay, so first and foremost, what does it say about Brother Paul coming to Zimbabwe without the government noticing he has had thuggish allegations. The same way our government took someone who was needed for the Rwanda genocide and even died here. Our government, run by ZANU-PF, has been protecting people with controversial histories too, one. Number two, mafia is a term used for illegal criminal organizations. And whether a diplomat is a diplomat or not, what Hubert Angel did and others, where they are using their power attached to their proximity to the head of state to push their agendas. Whether that money went to Hubert Angel or it went to the president himself, that is a mafia act. It's not about respecting a seat, but it's really about the people who have been assigned that role, understanding their role towards the people they serve. And is it racist or not? It's not, as I said earlier on, this is not an issue of Zimbabwe, but for Africa. The next big thing that has happened after slave trade is siphoning Africa of its natural resources. And it has been a battle between the East and the West. And it is facilitated by the own leaders who are in power. So it's nothing about racial. It's our own leaders who have betrayed our trust and have joined this mafia to make sure that they are able to afford proper clothing and lifestyles that benefit them more than the citizens. So for me, as I say, this is bigger than ZANU because Paul has moved. Paul had links to Gaddafi as well before Gaddafi even died. That shows you how deep-rooted the system is. Thank you.
Very well, Tawanda. I want us to wrap up now. We have to move on to our next topic. But before we do that, what would you expect the Zimbabwean government to do with this documentary?
I would expect the Zimbabwean government to negotiate with the rest of the world so that we are not excluded. So whatever it takes, so that we are back on the SWIFT system, whatever it takes, that our organizations that are state-owned are not sanctioned. Let's do it. Let's talk to the world. Let's be reconnected. Because if we are isolated, we lose a lot of value from our resources. And because there is demand for gold, gold is so valuable. Though for us, I traded. I don't have my gold ring. I prefer a silver ring. We don't, as a people, probably we don't use the gold as much as it is done in Asia. So if we're connected back to the world, we're back in the markets, and then we can have value for our resources and use our resources to build our country. So let's reconnect, let's re-engage. So let's keep that spirit of being open to the world and put all the options on the table for a best agreeable, a best alternative to a negotiated settlement. So we may want something, but let's compromise to the rest of the world so that we're connected to Europe, we're connected to America. What do they want? Let's talk and be connected to the rest of the world and not to be sanctioned.
Very well. We'll see how that happens. But Nozipho, I'd like to hear your thoughts on, what you expect the Zimbabwean government to do with this documentary, and also how you expect the international community, especially Dubai, that seemed to be the transit point where, this gold goes and comes back in cash to Zimbabwe.
Okay. First and foremost, what Tawanda is saying, we expect negotiations with the global world. That is not true. If we say we are a democratic republic, we've got ways of doing things, and we do not uphold what we vow to do. April, we're getting to 43 years of independence since the ZANU-PF government took power. From the time our currency was stronger than the British pound itself, and we were the breadbasket of Africa in as much as we're 2% of the African population. That shows about the potential of Zimbabwe. So clearly, that we are where we are because the ZANU-PF government has not committed to the international standards and negotiations according to what the IMF and all the people responsible for trade and market are doing. So it's not about negotiating them to say we'll do better. It's about the government doing better, not just for the international community, but even for us as citizens. That is what we demand. So when we talk about the next election, the question is, who's the leader who's going to come in and make sure those resources are there to help the citizens, just like next door Botswana is doing with its diamonds, not what is happening where the military and people attached to the president and military are the only beneficiaries. So yes, we need to reform ZANU-PF, or we need another party that is responsible to make sure it's out. So for me, going forward, because politics is about are we going to eat or not, and we're in economic wars as a country, we're losing millions, the government is failing even to pay civil servants. So for me, I'm not happy, and we should not be tiptoeing on this issue. This is bad, and we need a reformed government that is committed to what it says it will do internationally and be able to deliver its duties as the bearers of leadership. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it here for now. There are 3 more episodes in the expose to come. I'm sure we'll talk again on this very subject. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time here on The Square.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Tawanda and Nozipo. We've been discussing the expose about massive illicit gold trading and smuggling in Zimbabwe, a subject we'll pick again here on The Square.